Okay, so are you ready to take a deep dive into the revolt of the public with us?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
You've given us some really interesting excerpts from Martin Gurri's book to dig into. It's all about how this information age, the one we're living in right now, is really shaking things up,
Mm.
especially between everyday people and these big, powerful institutions.
Yeah, and it's not just about like how many followers you have on Twitter or whatever. Gurri goes way deeper than that.
Totally.
He's looking at these huge historical shifts, how information has always shaped our world, and how it's playing out on a global scale today.
Yeah, it's not just like a surface level tech thing.
Not all.
So one of the first things that struck me was Gurri's point about information overload.
Oh, yeah.
Like, do you remember the days before the internet? I feel so old saying that.
You know, right?
Like way back when.
When you could actually know something that most other people didn't. Like, that was valuable, you
Right,
know?
right.
And now it's like we're just drowning in information all the time. It's a complete 180 from how things used to be, right? Like, you used to wait for the evening news or get the morning paper to find out what was happening in the world.
And even if those sources weren't, like, perfectly accurate all the time,
Right. They still had all the power.
they had so much power because they controlled what we knew. And Gurri argues that the internet, it just totally blew up that whole system.
Completely shattered it.
And I love the way he puts it. He talks about this massive redundancy of information now.
Yeah.
It's like, you can shut down a newspaper or even a TV station, but try shutting down the internet.
Good luck with that. Right.
You're not going to silence all the YouTubes and the Twitters and, the thousands of other ways that information just zips around the globe now.
Exactly. And that right there, that's a huge problem for those traditional gatekeepers of information, like the media, academics, all those experts in their fields.
The ones who used to call the shots because they had the information.
Exactly. But now,
Yeah.
now that everyone have access to all this information, it's not so clear-cut anymore, is it?
It's like we all have backstage passes now.
We do.
We can peek behind the curtain, look at the information for ourselves, make up our own minds.
Right. No more just passively listening to whatever we're told.
And that's what I think is so interesting about who Gurri identifies as the public.
Yeah.
It's not about what social class you belong to or what your political beliefs are. It's more about this whole network of everyday people, all empowered by having access to so much information.
Right. And they can share information, shape the narrative in ways that just weren't possible before.
Exactly. And he connects that directly to this crisis of authority that we're seeing,
Oh, yeah.
which plays out in some really fascinating ways.
Yeah.
He talks about this guy, Hussein Drakhshan, the blog father from Iran.
What a story that is.
Talk about being in the wrong place at the wrong time, right?
I know, right?
But what's so interesting is that Gurri really tries to see it from the Iranian government's point of view.
He does. He does.
Like here you have this blogger openly criticizing the regime, reaching an audience directly through his writing.
Bypassing them completely.
And it wasn't even just what Drakhshan was saying. It was the fact that he was saying it independently on his own terms.
Right. Completely outside of their control.
That's what they saw as a threat.
Oh, absolutely. Because it challenged their entire power structure, the
Mhm.
whole way they operated.
And then there's that crazy example of those penguins in Turkey.
Oh, the protesting penguins.
I mean, come on.
It sounds made up.
Right. You can't make this stuff up.
But it's a perfect example of what Gurri's talking about. People finding ways to bypass those traditional media narratives.
Exactly. When the government tried to shut down the protests by keeping them out of the news.
Which happens all the time, by the way.
Yeah, all the time.
But people just went on Twitter, started sharing images and videos directly from the protests, showing what was really going on.
And they couldn't control it.
Nope.
Couldn't control it. And those images, like the ones of the penguins just hanging out on CNN, Turkey, while the protests raged on outside, I mean, those went viral. They got international attention. It showed that the public could take control of the narrative, that they didn't need the traditional media to do it for them.
Exactly. It all starts to connect, you see. The information explosion, the decline of these traditional gatekeepers, it's changing the very foundation of how power works. And that brings us to the core of Gurri's argument. This newly empowered public is starting to flex its muscles.
They're not just sitting back and taking it anymore.
Not at all. They're taking action. They're making their voices heard.
And that's where things get really, really interesting.
It does, yeah.
Because Gurri dives into these specific moments in history where the public, armed with all this information, they actually step onto the world stage and take action.
They do, yeah.
He argues that protests, crowds, They take on a whole new meaning now.
They do, and he uses these incredibly vivid examples, like he talks about the Egyptian Revolution in 2011.
Oh, no. Yeah.
You can practically feel the energy of Tahrir Square when you read his description of it.
Oh, I bet.
It's palpable.
And he really focuses on the role of social media in all of this.
Oh, absolutely.
And these key players like Wal Ghonim,
Right.
the Google employee who ran that We Are All Khaled Said Facebook page.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, think about it, right? This guy, he helped ignite this massive movement against the Mubarak regime.
I know, it's incredible.
From a Facebook page.
From Dubai.
Run out of Dubai.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, about the power of this technology and what it means for how change happens?
You really got it.
It's not just about, like, posting a clever meme or whatever, right? This is about real-world impact.
Totally. But Gurri, he doesn't just, like, stop there.
No.
He points out that, it's one thing to rally people against something, to get them riled up about the existing power structures, but it's a whole other thing to unite them around a new vision.
Exactly. Yeah, he looks at Spain's Indignados movement.
Oh, right, yeah.
They were furious about corruption, inequality, this political system that they felt completely ignored them.
And they got the world's attention.
They did.
With those protests.
Huge protests, but as Gurri points out, they could never quite articulate a clear alternative,
It's like they were so good at saying what they were against.
Right.
That they couldn't figure out what they were for.
Yeah, exactly. And Gurri sees that same pattern in the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Interesting.
So much anger, so much disillusionment, and rightfully so, right? When you think about the financial system and how it was impacting everyday Americans.
Yeah.
But, as Gurri argues, they lacked this unified message, like a set of clear demands.
Yeah.
And, in the end, it limited their long-term influence.
So these movements, they were powerful.
No, incredibly powerful.
Expressions of public anger.
Displays of frustration.
But they didn't completely upend the political landscape.
No, but that doesn't mean they were insignificant.
Right.
They brought crucial issues to light, they challenged the status quo, and they proved that this networked public, they could disrupt those traditional power structures.
And that disruption, to me, that's like the core
Yeah.
of what Gurri's arguing about the limits of power in this information age.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's not even just about, ideology or political maneuvering anymore. It's about the fact that information itself has fundamentally changed.
It's like the game has changed.
It has.
And the rule book hasn't caught up yet.
Exactly. And with this information explosion, things like certainty and predictability, those are in short supply.
Do you think anybody really knows what's going on?
I don't know if they ever did, but they definitely don't now.
Right.
Leaders are dealing with this constant flood of information, all this conflicting data.
Yeah, how do you even sort through all that?
Exactly. And meanwhile, the public, armed with their own information, their own opinions, they're not as willing to just blindly trust what's coming from the top down anymore.
It's like, show me the receipts.
Exactly.
It's like everybody's second-guessing everything now.
Right. And to really hammer this point home, to show us just how much things have changed, Gurri takes us to Brasilia.
Oh.
That city in Brazil.
Yeah.
Designed from scratch.
Like a blank slate.
Totally. Like this utopia of progress and order.
Yeah, like a city of the future.
Exactly. But as Gurri points out, it became this perfect example of how top-down planning can only get you so far in this new world.
Interesting.
It's this architectural marvel.
Yeah.
But they couldn't control how people actually live their lives, right?
Right. People don't always follow the script.
They don't. And unplanned settlements popped up. People adapted the spaces in ways that the architects could have never even imagined.
It's like they tried to impose this order, but chaos found a way in.
It always does, which, it's like this metaphor for how much control we can realistically have in a world that's become so complex.
We want to believe we're in control, but
are we really? No matter how carefully you plan things, there's always going to be that element of the unexpected.
that human element.
Exactly. And this whole feeling of uncertainty, it goes way beyond urban planning.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Gurri argues that we're seeing this decline in trust in experts across the board.
Oh, absolutely.
He uses this great example of Alan Greenspan,
Oh,
former Federal Reserve Chairman.
Yeah.
Remember, this guy was practically worshipped.
The maestro.
Right, for his economic knowledge.
Like he knew the secrets of the universe or something.
Exactly. But then 2008 happened.
The financial crisis.
A whole thing blew up. And suddenly, even the maestro,
Seemed human.
He seems
Yeah.
totally fallible, completely out of his depth.
Yeah, nobody had the answers.
And it really shook people's faith, right?
Yeah.
Not just in Greenspan, but in the entire system here represented.
Yeah.
It made people question everything. Like these complicated financial models that nobody understood.
Yeah.
You know, the unintended consequences of all these instruments. Like, how could this happen?
We put so much trust in these experts.
And they got it wrong.
And it wasn't just economists, right? Gurri brings up ClimateGate.
Oh, yeah.
Those leaked emails from climate scientists that ended up, like, fueling all these doubts about climate change.
It's a perfect example of how vulnerable experts have become in this new information landscape, right?
Like everybody's an armchair expert now.
Exactly. Like with this constant flow of information, every email, every single data point, every internal debate, it's all up for grabs.
Yeah.
Open to public scrutiny, dissection, interpretation.
It's like we're living in this age of, like, epistemological chaos.
Right.
Which, like, basically means that even the idea of truth is, like, fractured.
Completely up for debate.
How do you even navigate that?
It's incredibly disorienting.
So, like, where does this leave us? What's the way forward? What does Gurri say about the future of, like, democracy and all of this? Is there any hope?
Well, I wouldn't say Gurri's like, waving a magic wand or anything, but I'd say he's cautiously optimistic. He acknowledges the challenges, how trust is eroding, how everything's splintering, how we can't seem to agree on anything.
Yeah.
But he sees potential in this networked public and everyday people demanding more from those in power.
So it's not about, like, going back to the old ways of doing things.
No, not at all. It's about finding new ways to navigate this complex, messy, interconnected world.
And we're all figuring it out as we go.
Exactly. And Gurri really stresses this, that maybe the answer isn't about finding some big solution
Right.
from institutions that, let's be honest, have a tendency to disappoint.
Right. They're not always trustworthy.
No, he suggests that maybe, just maybe, the answer lies in accepting the uncertainty and finding meaning and purpose closer to home.
In our own lives, our own communities.
Exactly.
That's kind of refreshing, actually.
It is, because it reminds us that even in this crazy world, we still have agency.
We do.
We get to choose where we focus our attention, what we decide to believe.
We have more power than we think.
We absolutely do.
Well, on that note, I think we're going to have to wrap up our deep dive into the revolt of the public.
This was great.
It's a lot to process, and I hope everybody listening out there, keeps exploring these ideas, keeps questioning, keeps the conversation going.
Absolutely, because this is the world we live in now.
It is. And on that note, until next time, thanks for joining us.
See you next time.